what is intelligence? Most of us immediately think of intelligence as a human quality. We think of it as something that happens inside our heads. This human-centric understanding of intelligence has always been our starting point when we get curious about what kind of intelligence might exist in other beings. One of the ways we like to evaluate the intelligence of the so-called advanced animals is by observing their ability to use tools. A classic test is to put some kind of treat just out of reach, and then give an animal a tool to retrieve it. If they succeed, they've demonstrated their ability to make a plan to solve a problem and carry it out using the tool, all standard signs of intelligence. Most apes and monkeys are good at this game. But when one primate, the gibbon, was given this test in the 1930s, it was completely indifferent to these experiments. Researchers attached strings to food placed on the ground just outside the gibbon's enclosure, which I think is a nice word for a cage, but so, picture that, and the gibbons could see the food, and all they had to do was pull on the strings to bring it to them. They ignored the whole setup, and they failed to get the food. The researchers concluded that gibbons must be less intelligent than other primates. Well, in 1967, some other researchers tried something different. They hung strings tied to the food from the roof of the enclosure. Well, immediately, the gibbons grasped the strings and pulled the food down and ate it. So James Bridle writes, in one swift motion, the gibbons suddenly became intelligent. According, that is, to the narrow definition of the scientific method. Well, what was going on here? These researchers designed the experiment to account for the fact that the gibbons spend almost their entire lives in trees. They move around by swinging from one branch to another, and in his book he shows a picture of their hands, and their fingers are like, this long. They've evolved to be elongated so they can grasp branches and, swing from tree to tree. It also makes it harder to pick up anything that's lying on the ground. Evolving to live among trees may also make the gibbons less likely to even notice objects down there. They have no reason to really look at the ground. Well, it seems that their attention and their interest point upwards. Their whole orientation, physical and mental, is one of an arboreal existence. James Bridle, who's the author of a fascinating book called Ways of Being, writes, embodied as we are, with a different body pattern and awareness from the gibbon, we expect the solutions to problems to match our own patterns. This can make it hard to see how animals embodied differently might address the same tasks in different ways, unquote. For example, when we think of an elephant's trunk, well, we kind of think it's a combination of a nose and an arm and a hand. But if we're using our own bodies as a frame of reference, we'll be surprised to find that elephants don't use their trunks in the way that we would expect them to. In the tool test, they won't pick up a stick with their trunks to knock down a fruit hanging out of reach, but they will use their trunks to push a heavy box into position and put their feet on it to reach the fruit with their trunks. As Bridle puts it, elephants' trunks are not like our own limbs. They use them in a uniquely trunky way. Another question related to intelligence that researchers have tried to answer is a particular animal self-aware? They've tried to get at this question using the mirror test. Elephants failed this test completely. I'm sorry, this sounds kind of dumb. Until the scientists realized they needed to move the mirror from the floor where the elephants couldn't see. I mean, it's easy to laugh, but... So anyway, they got this big 8-foot-high mirror and they put it on a wall, and then one of the elephants, Happy, quickly learned that the white cross painted above one of her eyes, the one that she saw in the reflection, was on her own skin, and she immediately started touching it with her trunk. Great. Animal researchers designed a similar experiment for gibbons. The gibbons ignored the marks, treating the reflection as if it were another gibbon. But, rather than assuming that the gibbons lack self-awareness, we should consider another possibility. Maybe faces just aren't that important to gibbons. Bridle suggests that self-awareness may be bound up with other cues that are significant to them and not to us. To define intelligence simply as what humans do, says Bridle, is the narrowest way we could possibly think about it, unquote. As much as I respect Western science, it has tended to be very anthropocentric, placing ourselves at the center of everything, and hierarchical, placing ourselves at the top of the evolutionary tree. Interestingly, and probably not coincidentally, it has often been the maverick researchers, and many of them women, who've helped us recognize and appreciate that there are, in fact, many different ways of knowing, and many kinds of intelligence in the more than human world in which we live. The Australian biologist Monica Gagliano experimented with a kind of mimosa called the sensitive plant. Does anybody know about the sensitive plant? Well, when its leaves are touched, the plant rolls them up defensively into a tight bunch. What Gagliano did was to drop these plants in their pots 15 centimeters onto a foam pad. At first, the plants reacted with shock, rolling up all their leaves. But after 4 or 5 experiences of being dropped, the plants apparently realized there was no threat and that it was safe to keep their leaves open. And Gagliano and her colleagues retested these specific plants later on, and they found they retained the memory of the dropping over time. Bridle says, rather than denying the existence of plant memory because plants lack brains, discoveries such as Gagliano's give us the opportunity to rethink what memory is, unquote. Fungi are another fascinating example of a completely different but profound kind of intelligence, which we're only on the cusp of beginning to understand and appreciate. The underground thread-like cells of fungal mycelium are found almost everywhere on Earth. They form the neurological network of nature, and they often spread over thousands of acres. Plants, insects, other invertebrates, bacteria, and other forms of life all utterly depend on the communications from these networks. Paul Stamets, a non-traditional scientist who probably understands more about fungi than anyone else, writes, interlacing mosaics of mycelium infuse habitats with information-sharing membranes. These membranes are aware of and react to change to maintain the long-term health of the environment. The mycelium stays in constant molecular communication with its environment, devising diverse chemical responses to complex challenges, unquote. So the next time you're in the woods and you inhale that pungent smell of leaf mold, you might pause to wonder what chemical messages you're actually intercepting. There's a whole network of intelligent communication that we're barely even aware of. Until recent times, humans possessed an intimate knowledge of and relationship with everything we encountered. Every plant, animal, fungus, kind of soil, rocks, rivers, and other bodies of water, weather, the sky, in short, all aspects of the natural world. An intimate knowledge and relationship. Primatologist Jane Goodall writes of her experiences of rediscovering this kind of intimate kinship. It became possible only by flouting the usual rules of objective study, where you observe the animals but you don't interact with them. Through the close relationship she developed over years by living with the primates she studied, Goodall began to think differently. She went from thinking about the world analytically to experiencing the world as her companions did, directly and intuitively. Goodall says that 55 years of living with chimpanzees has not narrowed her perspective. Rather, the more she's discovered about the mysteries of life on Earth, quote, the more in awe I have felt at the wonder of creation, unquote. For Goodall, says James Bridle, intelligence, whatever it is, manifests in this kind of awareness and belief, this kind of wonder and awe. It is here that our thinking on intelligence breaches the mind completely and becomes part of larger questions about consciousness. Bridle believes that real intelligence is the kind that exists everywhere and between everything. Quote, intelligence is not just a collection of abstract modes such as self-awareness, theory of mind, reasoning, problem-solving, and planning that we can separate out and test under laboratory conditions. These are simply reductive and all too human interpretations of a more boundless phenomenon. Bridle goes on, rather, intelligence is a stream manifesting as something greater, something only recognizable to us at certain times, but immanent, that's I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T, everywhere, immanent in every movement, every gesture, every interaction of the more than human world. What Bridle is suggesting is that these are expressions of what is sometimes called universal intelligence or universal consciousness. We enter into the realm of the spiritual and the mystical, a realm that science generally avoids. Anthropocentric science has argued for centuries that redefining intelligence in these terms makes it meaningless. But Bridle argues otherwise. By expanding our definition of intelligence and including the broad spectrum of beings that all manifest it, quote, we might allow our own intelligence to flower into new forms and new emergent ways of being and relating. Bridle believes that embracing an understanding of universal intelligence is vital to our re-entanglement with the more than human world. More than ever before, we need to re-entangle ourselves with the more than human world. And we need nature's intelligence to help us see the way forward. But it requires us to think differently and to see differently. And the time is now. It's not just optional to change the way we think and see. It's really crucial. The visionary and poet William Blake wrote, "The tree which moves some to tears of joy in the eyes of others is only a green thing that stands in the way. Some see nature to be all ridicule and deformity, and some scarcely see nature at all. But to the eyes of one with imagination, nature is imagination itself." Nature is imagination itself. Can we envision the intelligence of nature and its myriad expressions as imagination itself? Can we see at least glimpses of how nature's expressions are all part of a universal intelligence, immanent in the universe? By stretching our powers of imagination, we can transcend our anthropomorphism and our anthropocentrism begin to shift our perceptions. We begin to appreciate and understand the more than human world. This concept of the more than human world, coined by ecologist and philosopher David Abram, seeks to help us override our Western anthropocentric tendency to separate ourselves from the natural world. We need to reclaim the perspective of indigenous peoples, a way of viewing ourselves and the natural world that our ancestors possessed. Indigenous peoples traditionally have never seen themselves as separate. Rather, there is a deep knowing that humans are an integral part of nature, and not even the most important part. When North American natives speak of all our relations, it's in the non-hierarchical sense. We are all related, and everyone and everything is interdependent. The more than human world acknowledges that our humanness is a single facet of something far greater. As Bridle puts it, all human life and being are inextricably entangled with and suffused by everything else. This broad commonwealth includes every inhabitant of the biosphere, the animals, plants, fungi, bacteria, and viruses. It includes the rivers, seas, winds, stones, and clouds that support, shake, and shadow us. We are who we are because of them, and we cannot live without them." Unquote. What could help us as a species to reclaim this understanding of our mutual dependency? What could help us take that understanding and put it to practical use, to put it front and center, so that we could literally save ourselves and save the planet from permanent damage due to our own misguided self-centeredness and our illusion of separateness and superiority? Here's what Bridle says. What if artificial intelligence, rather than being this thing we fear, will separate us from the world and ultimately supplant us? What if, through shepherding our AI in the direction of embodying universal intelligence, it would lead us toward healing, a healing of our relationships with the earth and its beings, to create a planet based on an ethic of care and equity? Quote, "Rather than being a tool to further exploit the planet and one another," Bridle writes, "artificial intelligence offers us a chance to fully recognize that everything is intelligent and therefore is worthy of our care and conscious attention." Unquote. The enemy, as Bridle points out, is not technology itself, but rather the inequality and centralization of power and knowledge. But it doesn't have to be this way. There are other ways of doing technology, and nature can be our teacher. And AI can learn from the wisdom of nature and teach us how to realign ourselves in the more than human world. It could literally create a blueprint for a sustainable future, one where humanity and the rest of nature could live in balance and the earth could recover. The time has come for us to leave anthropocentrism behind. We would do far better to immerse ourselves in the natural world, to delve deeply into its mysteries and its myriad intelligences, to understand and appreciate the intelligences of gibbons, elephants, sensitive plants, fungi, and the millions of other species of living beings. And maybe AI, drawing on the wisdom from nature, can be our ally in this. because it is nature and the universe, all our relations, that have so much to teach us if we will only pay attention. Let us look to the intelligence of nature, then, as our wise partner and our guide to the creation of a beautiful and sustainable future. May it be so.